Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and in today's podcast, we're going to explore the power of investment in infrastructure to change and improve people's lives every day. My guest is David Porter, the newly installed 161st President of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and a man who throughout his career has had public service top of mind, top of his agenda, and etched throughout everything he does. As a career civil servant in Northern Ireland, he knows better than most how important it is to work with communities and, of course, how civil engineering and infrastructure shapes almost every aspect of daily life, from the water we drink and the energy that powers our homes to the transport networks and flood defences that keep the country moving and safe. And yet, despite its central role, and as David points out, the profession often struggles to explain its value, earn public trust, and influence the decisions that matter most. But we need to meet that challenge. The UK faces ageing assets, a stretched public purse, ambitious net zero targets, rapid technological change, and a growing public scepticism about long-term investment. And in his inaugural address last November, David argued that civil engineers need to change how they talk about their work, moving away from technical language and towards a clearer focus on the services infrastructure provides and the societal outcomes it enables. He's also challenged clients, institutions, and engineers themselves to raise their game, to become better communicators, better decision makers, and better stewards of long-term public value. So let's dig deeper into find out how to ensure civil engineering and infrastructure truly serve society. So David, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you, Anthony.
Well, David, it's good to see you here. We're in the Institution of Civil Engineers in your very grand presidential office. Mm-hmm. How are you getting on? What do you do as president of the Institution of Civil Engineers? What's the institution all about?
Well, ICE really does three things. So it provides professional qualification for engineers. Mm-hmm. It provides engineering knowledge so that those engineers can be at the top of their game. And it has opinions on various things, and it likes to share those. And that's the three main things that the institution does. So whenever you look at all the different bits of the activity that we do, it generally can slot into one of those, either whether we're qualifying people in order that we have the engineering capabilities that we need to build that infrastructure that society needs, whether we are developing engineering knowledge, and whether that's through standards or podcasts or webinars, or we're sharing our opinions on how infrastructure works.
And you're enjoying yourself.
Oh, it's a fabulous opportunity and a huge honour. You introduced me there as the 161st president. Mm-hmm. So over 200 years of history, and we've almost 100,000 members, and they choose one of those members a year to be their president. Yeah. So a huge honour for me personally.
We've been pretty punchy in terms of your initial communications with the industry. You've said engineers need to stop talking about the stuff they're building and start talking about the services they create. I mean, what does that change look like for you in practice then? So it struck me on some rail journeys that I've had that I, as an engineer, was looking out through the windows, being really taken in how the engineers have shaped the landscape, how they have manipulated the landscape in order to fit the railway in, and how they have developed gantries in order to hold the signalling, and how the whole infrastructure all works. And then I looked around the railway carriage and realised that I was the only one looking out through the window at those features. And actually what everybody else in the carriage wanted was to get to the other end in order to go and do something. They weren't interested in how the infrastructure was actually functioning. It's just an enabler.
It was an enabler in order for other things to happen, whether that's going to visit their loved ones, going to their job, going to the hospital to get treatment, going to the airport in order to go on holiday. They were interested in the service that was being provided by that. Mm-hmm. And I think as engineers, if we actually reflect on that and think about that, it will help us then communicate better what we are delivering. We don't need to tell people how good the infrastructure is in terms of the strength of the concrete or the size of the rebar or the technical complexity, but we actually need to describe to people what service it offers.
You made the point, I think, around that in your address around a lady who was complaining about a road being shut because it stopped her getting to her bridge match, which was what she enjoyed doing in her life. So therefore, she didn't care really about what the work you were doing. She was interested in what it enabled her to do.
Yeah. And ironically, the road was closed because we were doing a bridge replacement. Oh, right. But actually, she was interested in a different type of bridge, right. the game of bridge. Yeah. She wasn't actually concerned why the road was closed or how. She was more interested in when it was opened, because what she wanted to do was interact with other human beings in order for normal life to continue.
Well, you could argue, when you go back to the Victorian era and when these grand things were built, the people who were building those, the Brunels of that time, were thinking about what it enabled people to do. It enabled them to be able to move goods, move people, access different parts of the land. But why is civil engineering, why has it struggled, and why does it still struggle to explain its value to the public today then?
So I think you're right in terms of in those early days, whenever new infrastructure was being built, how that was radically different. So if you can imagine being in the northeast of England, whenever the first railway was being developed 200 years ago, it was a spectacle. The people had never seen anything like it before. Whereas now we've got well-developed rail networks. So going out to tell somebody, actually, we're going to build a wee bit more railway, it hasn't got that same wow factor. So what we need to be able to demonstrate then is what that value is, what the infrastructure will actually do, what the service it will provide, as opposed to saying this new piece of infrastructure is going to be really exciting. It is for engineers and it is for those that are involved with the construction, but actually a lot of communities just see the negative in terms of land loss or the consequences of the construction being a disruption. And actually, if we can move through that and show what service that will actually deliver, we will start to then better explain the need for that infrastructure.
And there's going to be some big issues around the construction of new reservoirs, whether that's over in East Anglia, they've got some plans for some big reservoirs there, or whether it's connecting up offshore wind terminals with new overhead lines. But on the other hand, the majority of the infrastructure around us is already built. So how should engineers talk differently about disruption during maintenance or delays that are caused by that maintaining of existing infrastructure?
So I think, first of all, we need to be much more upfront with people and explain the disruption that will be caused, because a lot of people actually, whenever they are well informed, can adjust their lives, can adjust their journey. And I've experienced that through some of the major roads projects that I've been involved in. Providing really good information about the disruption actually lowers the blood pressure of those that are using it. They're not as frustrated. And from yourself, from your own travelling, if you're in an airport and are told that your plane is delayed, you'll be agitated about that. But actually, if you're told that your plane is delayed by 20 minutes and you have a high degree of certainty that in 20 minutes this problem will be relieved, actually, because I've got more information about it, I feel back in control. It's the not knowing that that this thing's going to be never ending, or this project just seems to go on forever. So providing really good information to communities about that level of disruption, understanding that actually we can't just go in and construct and cause this disruption without actually being able to explain it better.
Well, it's good to talk to you about these issues, David, because your day job is Director of Engineering in Northern Ireland's Department for Infrastructure, which means you are the guardian of the province's road and transport network, I think, and also the flood control network as well. I mean, it's a challenging role, but I imagine that your work is really noticed when it goes wrong.
The best bit is actually the fact that you know that you're providing the services that people need.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. You tend to be in the headlines whenever it is infrastructure.
So it isn't all downside then?
No, it's not all downside. And actually, as an engineer, it gives me great pride to drive around Northern Ireland and to see some of the projects that I've been involved in. And that gives me that sense of achievement as an engineer, that actually I have been part of building and improving the infrastructure across Northern Ireland in order that helps society flourish and for people to prosper.
Well, you've been a civil servant in Northern Ireland for almost all of your career. I mean, you joined the Road Service in 1998, and then the Rivers Agency, which, when you were Chief Executive of that in 2016, was rolled into the Department for Infrastructure. How has public engineering then, in your experience, evolved over the last 30 years?
So I think it has evolved really in two ways that I can identify. One, over my career, I can see that there's a completely different way that we view the environment over that period of time. At the very start, the environment was either a nuisance or at best a constraint to our works. Whereas today, it is very different in that engineers, whenever they're delivering projects, are going out of their way to make things better, not just to not cause any harm, but actually can we leave the environment in a better condition than we found it in? Mm-hmm. And so that has been a wholesale change in over my career. The other thing that I can see that has changed is just the scale of some of the projects. Whenever I started, we were doing relatively small projects, whereas now we seem to have a whole pipeline of mega projects which are really changing the whole way that we procure infrastructure.
Is that a good thing? Because a lot of the public are really interested in making that small congestion hotspot go away, or resolving the smaller issues that impact the network, rather than the grand projects that maybe get engineers perhaps excited.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right that we need to be careful that we don't just fall into the trap of saying that the only thing that the public want are the big shiny projects. Actually, there's real value in fixing the potholes. There's real value in maintaining our network. And we can see that how public opinion is actually changing over the years, from actually wanting the bright, shiny, big to actually wanting the mundane maintenance carried out, because actually they can see and feel the deterioration of the network, or they can see that their transport system isn't as reliable as it once was, or that their water supply system isn't as reliable as it once was. So the value of maintenance is hugely important. We need to recognise that.
I imagine you recognise the balance that needed to be struck between mending potholes and doing the job properly in terms of the maintenance project.
Yeah, and that's one of the big challenges that we all face at the minute. All roads authorities, whenever you have constrained budgets, you try and make that go as far as you possibly can.
Go into patch and mend.
And so you patch and you go to smaller patches, and we know that at small patches, it relieves us of our public liability headache, because the defect has been addressed and therefore nobody's going to trip or fall on it. But actually what many of those areas needed was a larger intervention, resurfaced or reconstructed in some cases. But because the money's not available to that, we patch and we mend. But that is driven by budgets. And what we need to do is recognise that we're not saving money by avoiding some of those bigger projects, and just by maintaining, we're actually saving up bigger problems and bigger headaches going forward.
Your background in Northern Ireland must give you an interesting perspective on, managing the politics of somewhere like something like the Institution of Civil Engineers. I mean, when you talk about building bridges for communities in Northern Ireland, it's got a completely different context. What is being from Northern Ireland? How do you think that your outlook on, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the institution, how does it differ from perhaps people from the mainland, Great Britain?
So being involved with politics at a very early stage in my career, I recognised that is a part of the process of delivery of infrastructure. And often you'll hear engineers talking about how the political process is a bit of a nuisance, and they wish it was better. Actually, what we need to learn to do is to use that process. And we need to make sure that informed decisions are being taken, particularly at ministerial level, in terms of what the priorities should be. So at an early stage, recognising that value of engaging with politicians, working with them and not against them, and making sure that you actually are listened to is hugely important. And that's what I've learned throughout my career.
Of course, you've been an active member of the institution for over 25 years. I spoke to Jean Venables, the past president of the Institution of Civil Engineers. She said, I remember David when he was in short trousers. I can't believe it's that long anyway. But so you've been involved a long while. Why is it so important to you professionally?
Well, ICE got me at a very early stage.
You were in short trousers.
Well, as a graduate trainee, and as you mentioned earlier, in road service, so figuratively in short trousers. So it got me at a very early stage. I could see the value of engaging, of having the opportunity to engage with more senior people within the industry, to have that opportunity to not just be in meetings with them, but actually be in a social environment with them, either over a cup of tea before a knowledge event, or afterwards, or through the ICE dinner in Northern Ireland, to actually engage and recognise our industry is built on people, and if you have a good, healthy professional network of people, actually that helps deliver your projects. So that's what I learned at an early stage.
The Northern Ireland is certainly got an incredibly healthy network of professional engineers. It's probably the most active in the whole of the ICE.
It's certainly a very special place in terms of my growing up within that institute or within that part of the institution. We're strong in many places. I've just been to Scotland, and 828 at a dinner is quite something to experience. And I'm also for Hong Kong next week, where we've 8,500 members in that area. So we are strong in many places, but I know presidents shouldn't have their own special place or their own special region. It's like asking a father who their favourite child is, and I don't think we're allowed to do that. But I have a soft spot for Northern Ireland.
Well, say many folks are engaged and involved, but we do keep talking about skill shortages. I've been working with you over the last couple of years on the Transforming Infrastructure Performance Summit series with the institution and Bentley Systems. We've heard all around the world that the sector talks constantly about skill shortages. What do you think we're still getting wrong then?
Well, I think getting wrong is probably a harsh assessment of it. I think we need to recognise that there has been an evolution of skills, that there are many other opportunities for people in different professions. So, lots of people do train as a civil engineer and then choose to go and apply that learning or that way of thinking in other professions. So that's part of the complex picture, but also the way that civil engineering projects are actually delivered. In the past, we would have talked to the team that's involved, and they would have all have come through a very similar route of going to college, getting a qualification in civil engineering, seeing themselves as civil engineers, and therefore delivering civil engineering projects. Whereas today, whenever you go in, it's much more multidisciplinary. You've got a whole range of different professions that are involved in actually delivering infrastructure. And that's why ICE has brought forward the infrastructure engineer qualification, because we actually recognise that actually not everybody will come with a civil engineering qualification.
Well, tell me about that. How do you become an infrastructure member then?
Well, an infrastructure engineer is somebody who may not necessarily have a civil engineering degree, but does work or does have an engineering degree, but does work in infrastructure. So a very clear example to me, because it resonates to where I started in my career, is that somebody with a mechanical engineering qualification, so it may well be somebody with a degree in mechanical engineering, who today works in the rail industry, who is involved with providing infrastructure, so they could put themselves forward. And in the past, whenever they tried to become a chartered civil engineer or incorporated civil engineer, the first hurdle that they had to overcome was that they didn't have the right academic base. Today, ICE will welcome you in because you are an engineer. You can demonstrate that you actually have competence in infrastructure, and you will go through exactly the same process, exactly the same testing by professional review in order to attain.
So it's not a dilution of competence. It's a recognition that competence now spans a much wider range of skills,
and also that people start their journey potentially in a different place. So some people that work in infrastructure didn't necessarily study a civil engineering qualification. So if they studied another engineering discipline but work in infrastructure, well then they can find their professional home in ICE.
Which brings me to the fact that you're a member of the industrial advisory boards for the built environment at both Queen's University Belfast and Ulster University. Presumably that is underlining that need to recognise that the industry's got a much wider span of skills.
Absolutely. And over the last 15, 20 years, what we've seen in universities is that they are offering many different types of degrees. So back in the day in Queen's, they would have had a civil engineering qualification, and then they also had an architectural engineering qualification, which was really the structural engineering version of their civil engineering qualification. But that was it. Whereas today, if you go in, there's a whole range of different qualifications with different specialisms, either in the environment or in structures. So recognising actually different people want to learn at that stage with different types of skills, and we need to recognise how that has changed.
The recent London TIP, Transforming Infrastructure Performance Summit, we heard a lot about the challenge of moving to a demand-led training strategy, from the current skills-led environment, which was delivering, I suppose. Well, the point was that half of the young people can't actually find jobs. Is that something which is limited to trade skills, or is that also a problem in professional skills as well?
So it's less of a problem for those that are coming through the university. There's certainly, from my experience in both the Ulster University and Queen's University, the industrial advisory boards are given stats each year of the number of people who complete their courses and those then that have found employment, and generally it's 100% or very close to 100% are finding employment. So it tends not to be an issue for those that end up with or coming out of our universities with degree level qualification. However, what we do need to make sure is that those people that are coming out either with trades or even from university, that they actually understand the process of moving forward, of getting professionally qualified, of becoming engaged in a professional body like ICE, and starting that professional journey, because it just doesn't finish with your academic qualification.
But there is, I mentioned this, this need to maintain professional competence. I mean, is there a balance that you need to meet, or how do you make that balance between deep technical expertise, which of course the institution absolutely stands for, whether it's the Institution of Civil Engineers or the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, and the need for communication, leadership and collaboration skills, which are arguably slightly softer?
Yeah. So those softer skills should be viewed as equally important as our technical skills. If you want to be a leader in our industry, if you want to be the person who is going to influence our decision makers, because you need to not just be technically good, you need to be able to explain it, and you need to find a way to explain that in a way that people actually get. So there is a place for people that want to be very, very ingrained or involved in the technicalities, and if you want to be a design engineer and that's what does it for you, that's well and good. But actually, if you want to be the person to front up and to negotiate and to influence, well, then you need these other skills as well.
And of course, you and I are of a certain generation, and we have a certain view of the world. You're working with your president's future leaders, who are the next generation coming through. How does their perception of the profession, the industry, help you to make decisions in your day job, but also as a president?
Yeah, so they're a really great bunch, and it's I would encourage anybody at a senior level to engage with younger people at the early stage of your career, because as you say, we're of a certain age and a certain generation, and we're at a certain stage in our career and a certain level in our organisations. And what I have learnt, or what it has really reminded me of by being involved with the future leaders, is that actually some of the things that we now take for granted at this level, actually they haven't got those skills.
Right.
And it's simple things like how a committee works.
Right.
Because we had a list of opportunities for future leaders, and they were fighting over getting onto one of the committees in ICE, and I couldn't quite understand it. Why do you want to do that? There's these other more interesting things, to my mind, that they should have been doing. And actually, whenever I asked them and said, look, why are you interested in that? Well, I have never sat in a committee. I don't know how a committee operates. I don't know how that decision is made, how decisions are made and recorded, and how that whole governance piece works. And actually things that we at a more senior level take for granted because we have had years of experience of that, and we forget actually at some stage we had to learn those skills.
But I imagine equally the other way around as well, is that you're learning a lot of things from them which you frankly got no idea what they're talking about.
I think where it's demonstrated very clearly, not just within my relationship with my future leaders, but actually within ICE and the way that we are engaging with communities, is actually in that knowledge offering. So ICE has had a long history of engineering knowledge being developed and being provided as CPD for our members. And actually, the way that knowledge is consumed today has changed. So it's not that our knowledge offering is bad, but actually the way that people consume it is different. So in this TikTok, YouTube age, they're consuming knowledge. Young people and people at the early part of their career are consuming knowledge in a completely different way than I did and you did back in the day. And we need to be very alive to that. So and the only way you know that is actually by engaging with young people, understanding how they are actually learning and how society is teaching and getting these new skills.
Apparently there's some really good podcasts to listen to, which they get a lot of learning from. Change the subject slightly. You've been championing the idea of informed clients. You are a client in your day job. Why do you prefer this term informed client perhaps to the traditional one of intelligent clients?
Yeah. So I think the opposite to intelligent, we can all work out that is. And I actually don't think that the clients who have potentially taken decisions which we're not all that comfortable with is because of a lack of intelligence, but it's because they weren't adequately informed of what the consequence of their decision. So that's why I prefer the term informed client. And an informed client is one who really understands the constraints on their decision making and on their infrastructure systems today, whether that be the financial constraint of, as we talked about earlier, maintaining a road, or whether it's the constraint of the labour market or the constraint of the construction industry and the contracting industry, to understand that in order to take informed decision about how we can take infrastructure projects. But most importantly, an informed client also understands what the future needs to look like. Right. And that's particularly important whenever we then think about net zero and the journey that we're on, that a really well-informed client will not just be managing the infrastructure that we need for today, but actually shaping it for that net zero future.
So should engineers be more willing, therefore, to challenge clients, even at the risk of perhaps losing work? Is that something you value as a client?
Completely. And I see some very good examples of that. So whenever I have engaged with some of our engineering consultancies, for example, they have said, actually, we don't get engaged in certain types of projects. We don't bid for certain types of projects because that doesn't fit well with us, because we don't see that as a future. And some of those in oil and gas and the likes. Now, that's not to say that is all bad. That's part of our future. But actually, you need to also recognise that we're on a net zero journey, and that's the direction of travel. But I've heard from some consultancies where they've actually started to move away, and that will have cost them clients. That will be a commercial decision. So yes, we as an industry and we as a profession also need to shape that and help to shape what that future looks like.
I mean, the institution chooses presidents from a range of different sectors around the engineering profession. Jim, of course, was an academic. And then we've had before, we were consultants. It's good, I think, that there's a client at the top table, so to speak. How, therefore, can you influence the IT to help raise the standards of infrastructure decision-making across government and the public sector?
So we do that by recognising the roles that we play. And I think there's a perfect place that we can try to get to where we have the institution working in a really healthy way, where we have the volunteers that are involved in that working well with the staff that are employed by ICE, so that we have got a good professional body, that we actually have an informed client, that we have a healthy consulting industry, engineering consultancy, and then we also have a healthy contracting industry. And if we can get those four, the role of professional bodies, an informed client, the consulting industry and the contracting industry all working in harmony, we will deliver better infrastructure projects.
And the government and the public sector employers, presumably they have to be better educated in terms of what those kind of services that the professions can deliver?
Better educated, but also understanding that whenever we're talking about an informed client, and if the decision maker is a minister, what we're not saying is that minister therefore must be a chartered engineer.
Right.
But that minister must understand, actually, I need to be informed by people who are competent, who do understand the systems going forward. And so that loss that we have seen of that technical expertise, particularly within government departments and within councils, that we need to get back to a point where, not that all the work is done in-house. As I said earlier, there's a nice balance between the institution and what it does, informed clients, the consulting industry and contracting industry. If we can get that in the right balance, then we will have a healthy industry going forward.
Which I imagine that your background in Northern Ireland and and managing, influencing politicians there. It's just a question of rolling your sleeves up and getting stuck in, is it?
Yeah, and also demonstrating your credibility.
Right.
Building that rapport with a minister or with decision makers, demonstrating that you actually are competent, that you are bringing forward well evidence-based and thought through plans, and also making sure that the risks and the pros and cons of the way forward are set out clearly, so that the person who takes a decision is equipped to take that decision.
Yeah. I imagine that's increasingly important in this new environment of artificial intelligence, because it's very easy now just to type in a question and assume that the answer you're going to get is professionally right. You said that AI won't replace engineers, but engineers who use AI will replace those who don't.
Yeah.
What's responsible AI look like to you then?
So certainly within organisations that use artificial intelligence, they need to understand that, as you described earlier, that it's not a panacea. It's not just don't take everything as read. Understand its limitations. Understand that it can have hallucinations, as they're called, where it gives incorrect information. Where it is understand that some of the AI facilities are eager to please and therefore provide you the information that you may well want, as opposed to actually having that evidence base. So understanding those limitations means that you can use it as a tool. It is a very, very good tool, and we need to recognise that it is a new tool in the toolkit in order to deliver infrastructure projects. Yeah. But it's not a replacement for a well-informed engineer to use that tool.
Yeah, we heard a lot, as say at the conference we were hosting here with the ICE before Christmas, around the need for companies to have strategies around the use of AI, because everyone's using it. You've got to make sure that you understand how people are using it. Should the ICE perhaps be setting firmer rules and standards around AI, and acting more as a guide or a convener to help professionals use and navigate this new environment?
Yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of what ICE should be doing. So ICE should not be saying whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to use AI. And it also shouldn't think that it is so great that it can actually define how AI will develop. Yeah. It's developing around us. It's evolving very, very quickly. However, what professional bodies, and particularly ICE, needs to be thinking about is the ethical consequences of using AI to make sure that our engineers, who today have a professional code of conduct and understand their personal responsibility, then can understand what the consequence of using these new tools are. Yeah. And so making sure that whole ethical use of these tools is understood, and that's where we need to be influencing.
I mean, Chris Williamson, the president of RIBA, Royal Institute of British Architects, he made that point that it's with us. Yeah, architects, engineers, you can't just stick your head in the sand and hope it will go away, because it ain't going away. So you've got to embrace it. You've got to manage it, and you've got to use it properly.
Right. Yeah, absolutely right. And don't be under the illusion that we can manipulate it in a particular way. Understand that it will evolve, and that we need to therefore keep pace in terms of the ethical use of these tools.
Yeah. Which brings us, I suppose, to the issue around leadership, trust, and long-term thinking, which professional engineers need to have. I mean, a time of low public trust in organisations with responsibility for public infrastructure, water companies, energy companies, railway companies in many ways that are now being renationalised. What role can civil engineers play in rebuilding that confidence of long-term infrastructure investment, the confidence that investment is actually going to deliver better outcomes for their lives?
Well, as we started talking about the importance of infrastructure, so everybody relies on infrastructure all day, every day. It has become an integral part of our life, our society. And if we want to continue to help the planet and people to thrive, well, then we as engineers need to be able to explain how the engineering or how our infrastructure is delivering the service that people want. Now, not the technicalities of it, but the service that it provides. If we continue to do that, we need to continue then also to work to make sure that we have the right level of maintenance, that we are working on the resilience of our infrastructure assets, that we are recognising that some of our infrastructure assets are ageing, and that we need to really emphasise that fact, and we need to do something about that, that we need to change the way that we're spending money in this country from the bright, new, shiny, actually to making sure that we have the right balance between building new and maintaining our existing structures.
And so I suppose finally, David, as President of the Institution of Civil Engineers, what would your advice be to young young engineers so that they're able to help decision makers to ensure that we have the infrastructure society needs in the future?
Well, my experience from a very early stage was whenever I got involved with ICE, I found my place there. And as I put more into the institution, I recognised actually I got an awful lot more out of it than I ever put into it. So my encouragement to young engineers, in order to be better informed, to be part of that professional network, to be really good at communicating, is to find your place in ICE.
Yeah. Well, look, David, it's great to see you in your presidential office. I'm always tickled by the fact you describe your background to becoming president as being just a working engineer who's got involved. And I suppose you would maintain that. But I think there's a small amount of sprinkling of stardust which you're bringing to the institution. You're enjoying yourself, though.
It's absolutely fabulous opportunity. As I say, 100,000 members, and they choose one a year. So I keep having to pinch myself to make sure that this is actually real.
Right. Well, you got the gold medal to prove it. So look, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today and to update us on what you're up to here to ensure that we have the infrastructure that's going to change people's lives. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Well, sadly, that's all we've got time for on the podcast now, but there's more in the pipeline as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. So thanks again for joining us. Thanks again to David, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.